Diana, Princess of Wales, has been seriously injured in a car accident in Paris.
They were apparently being pursued by paparazzi.
When they were involved in some kind of collision, we don't know with what.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident.
There are lots of unanswered questions of what happened in Paris on that night.
August 31st, 1997, 12:25 a.m. A black Mercedes sedan crashed into concrete pillar number 13 in the Alma Tunnel in Paris. The official story was that it was an accident resulting from too much speed, alcohol, and drugs. Princess Diana expressed fear of British Secret Service operatives working for MI5 and MI6. Was her fear finally and conclusively proven correct?
I and many other people thought she was paranoid. Many times she'd say to me, "Look underneath the car, Paul. Is there anything unusual under there?" But then we'd pull up the floorboards, looking for bugging devices. "Can you see any wires? Are they hidden? Take that plug off the wall, unscrew the plug and have a look inside." Sometimes it's in the telephone, she'd say.
Mohammed Al-Fayed, father of Dodi Al-Fayed, who died in the crash, is certain there is something we're not being told about the incident.
I am the father who lost his son, and I'm the only person who knows exactly what happened. I know the threats Diana have.
The CIA, FBI, NSA have done nothing to assist my efforts. Instead, they have done everything possible to delay.
She's gonna be murdered in a car, and nobody done nothing to protect her, because they know they're planning to do what they have done to my son and to her.
Under English law, an inquest is required in cases of sudden or unexplained death. The inquests into the deaths of Diana and Dodi Fayed opened on January 8, 2007, with Lord Justice Scott Baker acting as deputy coroner. On April 7, 2008, the jury decided that Princess Diana had been unlawfully killed by the grossly negligent driving of Henri Paul. To this day, there are many people who don't believe or accept the verdict of unlawful killing.
We think that the whole thing was perverse, and it demonstrates once again the cover-up that has gone on, not only in France, but the UK, and I dare to say the United States.
I just think that the whole thing was a conspiracy. It was never an accident. Like, the whole lot was planned. She was just too good for them, and they had to get rid of her because she was like the people's princess, and they just were nothing, really. They're nothing without her, and they still are.
When I first heard there'd been this appalling tragedy, I naturally assumed that it had been a terrible accident. But subsequently, everything that happened made me believe that it wasn't an accident, that it was a conspiracy.
This film takes an in-depth look into the conspiracy theories surrounding the death of Princess Diana. It was perhaps a certainty that the most famous royal celebrity death of the 20th century would attract conspiracy theories. So it's not surprising that that's exactly what happened when Diana, Princess of Wales, died in Paris in August 1997. Paul Beryl was Princess Diana's confidant and butler for 10 years. He claims that the princess would still be alive today if the British royal family didn't abandon her after her divorce from Prince Charles.
The Prince and Princess of Wales are to separate.
Because they let go of her and abandoned her, she was let loose in a strange world that was dangerous, and there was nobody taking care of her. So in that way, it was a bad thing. Although she was able to do whatever she wanted, She wasn't protected. And that led to her death. If the father of her children had bothered and taken care of her, she would still be here. There were so many people that let go of her, that abandoned her, that let her go into the world. It wasn't a safe place for her. She was too important. She was too big a person to be let free. And having lived inside that safety of that gilded cage of a palace for so long, what happens to a beautiful peacock when you let it into the wild? It gets eaten by something. You see, she needed to be kept safe, and that's what she was looking for. She was looking for her Aristotle Onassis. She always thought that she was a kind of Jackie Kennedy, that had lost her mainstay in life and still needed someone to take care of her and protect her, keep her safe. And in a way, Dodi Al-Fayed was a kind of Aristotle Onassis. He was heir to a fortune, had an airplane and a boat, and was able to take the princess around the world in a safety corridor. And that's what thrilled her in a way, that for once in her life she'd found someone that could treat her in the way which she'd become accustomed and the way that her lifestyle had always been.
Alan Power, author of The Princess Diana Conspiracy, is under no illusions as to who he thinks was behind the death of Princess Diana, and claims there is a long history of murder orchestrated by the British royal family.
But they used to do all sorts of disgusting things, and it amazes me that we are now in a position where we have the power and the choice of retaining this bunch or not. That we just let it carry on. We have the choice of people being murdered. A guy called von Konigsmark, the lover of George II's wife, was murdered. Because for his impudence. He wasn't even bothered about the fact of having it away with his wife. It was for his impudence to do with the monarch's wife. Then you have Caroline, George IV. He was married to her. He didn't like her very much. She went back to Germany. She then came back over here when he ascended the throne. And on the night of his coronation, she was taken ill in her bedchamber and died from poisoning a few days later, and she said at the time she had been poisoned. So they just do whatever they feel like doing, whenever they feel like doing it. They have, frankly, no concern as long as they stay in power. They must hang on to power, whatever's required, they'll do it.
Summer 1997. For weeks, Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed had been touring the Mediterranean on the Al-Fayed family yacht. Since her divorce from Prince Charles in 1996, tabloids had excessively speculated about Diana's alleged romances. When a photographer caught the two embracing, the picture was sold to a British newspaper for almost £250,000. It was at this point that the paparazzi realized that pictures of the couple could be extremely profitable. On Saturday, August 30th, Diana and Dodi traveled to Paris and planned to stay overnight at the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's billionaire father, Mohammed Al-Fayed. Even though the princess was divorced from Prince Charles, she was still entitled to the same level of security as other members of the royal family. Diana chose not to take advantage of their security agents and was being looked after by members of the Al-Fayed security team, led by Trevor Rees-Jones.
She knew that the bodyguards who went everywhere with her would be reporting on her movements back to Prince Charles, who she was seeing, where she was going, how long she stayed in this particular house, who she met with, who she spoke to, who she had a cup of coffee with.
Well, Diana didn't want security because that would have meant MI6. She couldn't stand MI6, she loathed them. And she knew exactly what they're up to. They've been bugging her in London for years. They were watching her all the time. She didn't want that because that's what she'd been getting, them watching her.
And she wasn't prepared for that. Yes, she needed security. She wanted security. But she knew that security came with strings attached, and she wasn't prepared to be tied up in strings by the royal family. She wanted freedom from all that.
While in Paris, Diana expressed discomfort and made her feelings clear to Paul Beryl that she wanted to return home to London.
I spoke to the princess the day before and made all her plans for her return. Then she rang me from the hotel in Paris and said, "Oh, I'm going to be a little late because I'm in Paris. I've got to be here for Dodi. He has some work to do for his father, and so I'm going to be late. I don't want to be here. I want to come home. So will you arrange everything a day later?" I said, "Yeah, sure. It's no problem." And then she said something very strange. She said, "Promise me you'll be there." I said, "Of course I'll be there. I'm always there." "No, say it." "What do you mean, say it?" I said. She said, "No, say, I promise I'll be there." I said, "Okay, if it makes you feel any better, I promise I'll be there." She said, "That's all I wanted to hear. I want to come home. I'm crawling the walls," she said to me. "I want to come home. I want to see my boys."
Many people believe the reasons for their trip to Paris was for Dodi to pick up an engagement ring he had custom designed for Diana.
"Has he spoiled you?" "Yes, he's spoiled me. He's bought me a lovely watch. He's bought me some earrings. He's bought me a bracelet. He's bought me a necklace." I said, "Oh my goodness, you know what's coming next. It's a ring."
Mohammed Al Fayed said that they were talking about, that Dodi had told him that basically he was getting married in November. This was now the end of August, so it was a matter of 8-9 weeks. Tell the kids first, get a few things organised, get married, and off they went. It's pretty obvious that was happening. There's no doubt about it in my mind, none whatsoever. They were definitely getting married.
Michael Cole and Alan Power firmly believed that Diana and Dodi were poised to announce their engagement, and that the impending engagement was something the British royal family could not allow to happen.
It would have been most unwelcome to the British royal family and the British establishment for Diana, the mother of the future king, to have married a Muslim. Now, Dodi was a charming and delightful and lovely guy, and he was a Muslim, but in all the years I knew him, the only time I ever knew him go to the mosque was when he was dead for his funeral. He wasn't a militant Islamist, but these people don't think along those lines. They think that had she married a Muslim, and had they had 2 beautiful children, shall we say, a couple of little girls, the newspapers would have been writing about Diana and Dodi and their children. You would have had, in effect, in Britain, an alternative royal family. Now that could not have been allowed. And many people would have said, "Isn't it charming? Diana, so happy now. Dodi, a nice-looking guy, 2 beautiful children. Aren't they so much more attractive than the gloomy, rather boring Germans who are our royal family?" Now that was a risk they couldn't take.
So if the British royal family were somehow involved in the deaths of Dodi and Diana, who would have carried out such a brutal act as to end the life of the mother of the future King of England?
And if you think about it, the British Secret Service, SIS, known as MI6, what is their number one priority? What is their justification for existence? They're there to counteract militant Islam. What is their motto? To protect the state. And they would have seen, or could have seen, and very well did see, it as a threat that Diana was going to be married to a Muslim. And they didn't know, 1, whether she was pregnant, 2, whether they were coming back to London on the Monday to announce an engagement. Then it would have been too late.
August 30th, 1997, 9:30 p.m. Dodi Al Fayed's plans to take the princess for a romantic meal are ruined as the couple are followed by paparazzi. The couple decided to retreat to a location the paparazzi could not penetrate, the Ritz Hotel. The couple decided to leave the Ritz and head to an apartment owned by Mohammed Al-Fayed, a short distance from the hotel. Henri Paul, the deputy head of security at the Ritz Hotel, had been instructed to drive the hired Mercedes-Benz S280 to elude the paparazzi. A decoy vehicle left the Ritz from the main entrance, attracting a throng of photographers. Diana Ann Doty then departed from the hotel's rear entrance at around 12:20 a.m., heading for the apartment. Diana and Doty were the rear passengers. Trevor Rees-Jones and Henri Paul occupied the front seats. At this point, the paparazzi had caught up with the Mercedes. Henri Paul drove faster to get away from the photographers. Just before Paul headed into the Alma Tunnel, Paul swerved slightly to avoid a slower car, but grazes the vehicle. The car began to spin, at which point Henri Paul effectively lost control of the Mercedes. At 12:23 a.m., at the speed of roughly 100 kilometers per hour, the car slammed into concrete pillar number 13 in the Alma Tunnel. What appears to be a tragic accident is, to some, a much more sinister event. As the victims lay in the wrecked car, the paparazzi rushed to help, while others took pictures. Fayed had been sitting in the left rear seat and appeared to be dead. Fire officers were still trying to resurrect him when he was pronounced dead by a doctor at 1:32 a.m. Henri Paul was declared dead on removal from the wreckage. Still conscious, Trevor Rees-Jones had suffered multiple serious facial injuries. The first police patrol arrived on the scene at 12:30 a.m. Diana was removed from the car at 1 a.m. She then went into cardiac arrest. Following external cardiopulmonary resuscitation, her heart started beating again. She was moved to the ambulance at 1:18 a.m., left the scene at 1:41 a.m., and arrived at the hospital at 2:06 a.m. At 4 a.m. on the 31st of August, 1997, Princess Diana was pronounced dead. Paul Beryl had the grueling task of going to Paris to see Diana's body.
It was a very warm night in Paris. The windows were open. There was a fan on the bedside table. And I could see the princess lying in a bed, covered by a white sheet. And as I approached her bed, the grief kicked in. The emotion started to rise inside me, and I couldn't contain it. And I was devastated. The fan on the table was blowing her hair, and her hair was moving, and I could see her eyelashes moving. And I thought, she's just sleeping. She's just asleep. She's not really dead. So I said to her, open your eyes just once more. But she didn't. I think we all know what that feels like when it comes to our loved ones. We want them just to open their eyes just for one more minute. But that didn't happen. And I realized that she was gone. And then I remembered something she said to me. She said, the greatest privilege she ever had in life was being with someone when they passed. Because she said, you know what happens? When you pass, your soul lifts from the body and it stays in the room. So I knew she was there with us. I knew she was in the room. As I sat there with her, she wasn't there, but I knew she was here somewhere, watching. So in a way that was a bit of a comfort to know she was there. But you know how many times she's there? She's always there. And she's always in my dreams. And she will be with me for the rest of my life.
She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain, throughout the world, with joy and with comfort. How many times shall we remember her, in how many different ways? With the sick, the dying, with children, with the needy. When with just a look or a gesture that spoke so much more than words, she would reveal to all of us the depth of her compassion and her humanity. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
After hearing the terrible news of the accident, Michael Cole's first thought was to ring Mohammed Al-Fayed.
I rang immediately Mr. Al-Fayed, who was at his country house in Surrey, and he answered the phone, but he didn't speak to me. He held the phone, he was on another telephone, and I could hear that he was speaking to his helicopter pilot to arrange to get the helicopter to come pick him up so he could go straight to Paris. And when I did speak to him, I said, look, I've just heard that there's been a terrible accident and that I'm sorry to say that Dodi's been killed. This is the news I've been given, and that the princess has been injured. And I will never forget his courage, his stoicism, because he said, Michael, let us pray that this is not true. Let us pray that they're all right. He said, I'm on my way to Paris in a minute, and I'm going to find out what's happened. Let's stay in touch with each other. And it was the most appalling news. I mean, I hadn't even known that they were in Paris, so it was all news to me. But I thought, well, I have to do something, and I got up and I rang the Ritz Hotel in Paris, and I spoke to the duty manager, and he told me what had been going on during the day, how they'd been harassed by the press. And then I rang the princess's stepmother, Reign Countess Spencer. I told her the news, and she also, like Mohammed, was extraordinarily strong and courageous. Well, within a very few minutes, she called me back, and bear in mind that the first report said that Diana wasn't badly injured, that she may have broken or dislocated an arm, that she was seen walking into the ambulance from the car. All these reports were put out, so I was thinking that she'd been hurt, but not terribly badly. And then Reign Spencer said to me, she's been killed. And however dreadful it was to hear that Dodi was dead, this was somehow even worse. And it was like being hit in the solar plexus with very hard. And I was in my kitchen, standing by the worktop, and I fell to my knees and I just burst out into tears. When I'd recovered, my wife was with me, I rang Mohammed. By this time, he was in France, he was in a car, traveling towards the morgue where Dodi's body had been taken. And when I told him, he didn't know, I told him that Reign had found out that Diana was dead. He he said, Michael, this is terrible. He said, but let us pray it's not true. I'm going to the hospital. He said, instead of the morgue, I'm going straight to the hospital. And he decided to go to the hospital where the princess had eventually been taken. And he said, well, let us keep in touch with each other. And having done everything I could, I then went to London and went to my office at Harrods, arriving there at about 6:30 in the morning to deal with the tremendous amount of press interest, which of course then continued and to some extent continues to this day, nearly 18 years later.
The tragedy of that night still lives on with the British public, and many people still believe the events that unfolded that fateful night simply don't add up to the jury's verdict of unlawful killing.
I just can't believe she's gone.
It's just like a bad dream, you know.
Soon after the crash, conflicting reports were released regarding the state of Princess Diana directly after the crash. Some stating that she was not badly hurt, and others stating she was severely injured. One member of the chasing paparazzi that night, Ramol Ra, was known to have entered the vehicle after the crash and spoken with Diana, telling her help was on the way.
He actually put his hand on her neck to feel her pulse and spoke to her and said, help is coming. It's on its way. Now, he wouldn't have been talking to her unless she had been compos mentis, as long as she'd been aware of what was going on. A doctor who allegedly was just by chance traveling in the opposite direction stopped his car. He went and treated her. Neither of these people saw the internal injuries which apparently she had.
The first call to the emergency services was logged at 12:26 a.m. The ambulance carrying the princess arrived at La Pitié-Salpêtrière at 2:06 a.m. The amount of time it took for the ambulance to reach the hospital has since been scrutinized by many theorists.
When I got to Paris, I was told that the ambulance took an hour to get from the scene of the accident to the hospital, which is only 5 minutes away. What happened in that time? Where did the ambulance go, and what happened inside the ambulance?
In this country, in America, scoop and shoot. You scoop up the patient from the scene of the crash and you take them as fast as you can to the best equipped nearby emergency room. In this case, that did not happen.
Many theorists have speculated that Diana's injuries were made worse inside the ambulance as to ensure her death.
All I can tell you is what I saw. And when I got to Paris, I was handed a see-through plastic bag of what were the princess's clothes in which she died. And I couldn't tell if they were clothes because the bag was just full of blood. What happened inside that ambulance must have been a massacre.
It took an amazing hour to get to a hospital 4 miles away. And on the way there, they drove past 2 other hospitals, which could quite easily have treated her. Now, any accident specialist, trauma specialist, will say the best place for a patient to be is in a hospital, because only there would they have been able to detect fully the extent of her internal injuries. Why that wasn't done? I mean, even at the gates of the hospital, they stopped for a number of minutes before taking her inside.
Who made those decisions? And what actually happened? What did they do?
None of this makes sense. And I wouldn't want it to happen to anybody's child or to themselves, because you just pull your hair out in anguish that this wasn't done.
Many eyewitnesses claim to have seen numerous cars and bikes surrounding the Mercedes as it entered the Alma Tunnel. Some witnesses also claim to have seen a white Fiat Uno purposefully collide with a Mercedes. Alan Power is in no doubt as to who he thinks was chasing the Mercedes that night.
There were witnesses who saw various things. Some saw the car flying down with no bikes around them at all. Others saw cars and bikes suddenly appearing close to the Armour Tunnel, not having fallen down. A lady, perhaps the most important of all, called Suat Mufakir, who was one of the witnesses, actually went into the tunnel just about the same sort of time. She was ahead of the Mercedes, and the Fiat just rammed inside in front of between her and the Mercedes. She saw the flash of light, got the flash of light. They accelerated away, trying to avoid any car hitting them. They heard this crunch and bang behind, and she said that she saw some lights way back at the other side of the tunnel, approaching the tunnel. And when she was asked again later on at the inquest how far behind, she said far, far behind. Those would have been the paparazzi coming behind, which is what they wanted. They wanted the paparazzi there so they could blame them. Assassins, SAS, SBS troops on their bikes do the job, gone in seconds. It's all done. People also waiting in the tunnel on the side to come over and make sure the coup de grace is administered if she isn't already gone. Of course, Henry Paul was already dead. He was dead. Trevor Rees-Jones wasn't. So their main focus was, I think, my gut feel is they didn't know that Trevor Rees-Jones was still alive. They were focusing on Diana. She was still alive. And there was a note saying they also spotted a red mark inside her thigh, which could have been an injection going into her as well. So all they had to do was a quick injection and out, knowing that she'd be dead within hours. There's no doubt about it in my mind, none whatsoever. She was definitely murdered.
One would expect that with the financial means Dodi Fayed and Princess Diana had at their disposal, there was absolutely no reason why they should have been chauffeured in a vehicle that was snatched at gunpoint a few months prior to the fateful night. But that's precisely what happened. This fact on its own is perhaps at best nothing more than a coincidence. But where the events turn decidedly strange is how that very Mercedes was returned a few days earlier in pristine condition, except for one very important aspect. The onboard computer chip was missing. The onboard computer chip controls, amongst other things, navigation, acceleration, steering, and braking of the vehicle. Considering the princess's death was due to a car crash, the fact that the Mercedes S280 involved in the crash had its onboard computer chip stolen some days earlier pushed the pervasive accident account into firmer conspiracy territory.
It's known the brake lights were flickering on the car before it left the Ritz Hotel. We don't know about the seatbelts, whether they were made inoperable. We don't know about that. But we know that certainly afterwards, Mercedes offered to come and inspect the car on behalf of the investigation 3 times. I said, no, thank you very much indeed, each time. And they could have just determined whether the seatbelts were inoperative, brakes had been tampered with, any explosion taking place inside the car. It would become public knowledge. The answer was no. The car was, the remains of the car were locked off a police compound, came back to the UK 7 years later. Now, absolutely in bits. Nothing available to investigate, really.
You have to ask the question, why would the authorities prevent Mercedes from conducting a thorough inspection of the car that could have potentially provided vital information on the crash? Another occurrence that has caused suspicion, especially amongst the Al Fayed family, are the circumstances in which Princess Diana's body was embalmed. Mohammed Al Fayed alleged that Diana's body was deliberately embalmed shortly after her death to ensure that any pregnancy test at the post-mortem would produce a false result. A Metropolitan Police inquiry team was established in 2004, Operation Paget, to investigate the conspiracy theories that led to the 2007 to 2008 British inquest. Regarding the embalming theory, Operation Paget found that August 31, 1997 was a very hot day in Paris. Diana's body had been stored in an empty room adjacent to the emergency room where she had been treated, as the mortuary was on the other side of the hospital grounds. Dry ice and air conditioning units were placed in the room to keep it cool, but appeared to have little success. Diana's two sisters and Prince Charles were scheduled to view the body later that afternoon before bringing it back to the UK. This meant there was very little time to prepare the body. The hospital staff decided to press ahead with embalming the body without receiving the proper authorization. Under French law, paperwork is required to be completed before undertaking the embalming of a corpse likely to be subject to a post-mortem. This paperwork was completed, but only after the embalming had been carried out, giving rise to allegations of suspicious circumstances.
The discovery that Princess Diana's body was embalmed in Paris within hours of her death. What reason can there be other than it was part of cover-up to prevent proper forensic test in the UK?
In this case, there was no permission given. It was just authorized by a fairly low-ranking British diplomat who happened to be there. The effect of embalming her and drenching the corpse in formaldehyde was that it meant that any tests were nullified. They had no value whatsoever.
The royal family are embalmed, but usually by the royal undertakers in London. So when the princess got back to London, the Queen's physician and the princess's physician attended her body, and they did say to me, there was nothing they could do. Everything had been done. So they didn't have any answers. All the answers are in Paris.
Alan Power claims to have spoken to the doctor who saw the fetus in Diana's corpse on the night of her death.
We do know that Dr. Dion, Elizabeth Dion, whom I've spoken with again, and all these witnesses I've been to see and spoken to, she saw the fetus in Diana's corpse. Now, I have to be careful what I say here because I don't want to get Dr. Dion into any serious trouble. And she wouldn't, none of the witnesses would cooperate really at all. They like living. But Dr. Dion, when I was talking to her, made an interesting point. She was talking about working in a hospital in San Francisco. And we know that eventually she did. But my question was, well, what happened on the night in question? Where were you? How was you? Someone said you saw the fetus in Diana's womb. And then she just didn't actually answer it, but kept on talking about being in San Francisco. Same way as the police couldn't find her. It took me 9 days to find her. I didn't have a police force behind me. And then they couldn't find her, but then they had to because the journalists indicated where she was. They had to go and get an affidavit. They did. The affidavit didn't mention pregnancy and didn't mention being in Paris at all. It just mentioned that she was working in San Francisco and no mention of the fetus. So I said, well, you know, basically, how is that you could have seen this or made this comment? And she said to me, interesting. She said, well, in any case, it must be a problem with it. Must be I wasn't on the rota that night. I thought, you're working in San Francisco, but you weren't on a French rota. Why? Why would you be on a French rota if you're working in San Francisco? I didn't press it. She saw the fetus in Diana's womb. Diana was pregnant. No doubt about it.
I think the question is not really was she pregnant, but more relevantly, did some people think she might be? And was that the reason why this extraordinary decision was taken? You know, there's so much about this that does not make sense unless you see it as some form of cover-up, conspiracy to conceal the truth. And certainly there's much evidence of that, and certainly the princess herself believed that her life was in danger.
Diana's paranoia had been growing for a number of years, and as Paul Beryl recollects, Diana grew continually suspicious of telephone bugs in her house and tracking devices on her car.
I and many other people thought she was paranoid. Many times she'd say to me, look underneath the car, Paul. Can you get that far enough underneath to have a look? See, is there anything unusual under there? Can you see a tracking device, or can you see a pipe that's leaking? Can you see anything? But then we'd pull up the floorboards, looking for bugging devices. Can you see any wires? Are they hidden? Take that plug off the wall, unscrew the plug and have a look inside. Sometimes it's in the telephone, she'd say. We'd take the telephone to bits.
Diana was a very sensible person. She may not have passed a lot of exams, but she was not, as she said, as thick as two short planks. She was very astute, she was very streetwise, and she firmly believed that her calls were being bugged. There was evidence for it. Her conversation with James Gilby, so-called Squidgygate, that was not only bugged, it was recorded and it was broadcast.
Perhaps the most apparent display of her paranoia was a letter in which she wrote to Paul Beryl, predicting the manner in which she would die. The letter was written in 1993, 10 months after her separation from Prince Charles was announced. In the letter she wrote, "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and a serious head injury in order to make the path clear for him to marry Tiggy. Camilla is nothing but a decoy, so we are all being used by the man in every sense of the word."
The letter, even today, is rather chilling to read in her own hand. It is spooky, beyond spooky. And when I first read it, I asked her about it, and she said, well, you know my fears. You know we're always checking for things under the car. You know that I think I'm being bugged. She said, this is just an extension of that. And I just fear that I'm not going to live very long, that they all want rid of me.
Diana was so concerned about the possibility of being murdered, she went to see her solicitor in 1995, Victor Mishcon. At the time, Mishcon was the most respected solicitor in the whole of London. In the meeting with Mishcon, Diana expressed her fears and concerns about the possibility of her death. She specifically mentioned her husband wanted her out of the picture and that he was planning a motor accident. The day after the meeting, Victor Mishcon made a handwritten note of everything that Diana had told him, and also consulted with Diana's private secretary, who stated he could understand why Diana felt so concerned for her safety. After the tragic night in Paris in which Diana was killed, in circumstances very similar to those she had outlined to Mishcon, Mishcon went to see the then Commissioner of Police, Paul Condon, the top policeman in Britain at the time. Mishcon outlined to Condon everything the princess had told him, and also gave him a copy of his handwritten notes he had made, summarizing the princess's fears about her potential death. Paul Condon chose not to pass on Mishcon's notes to the French inquiry. Had Condon passed on that note to the French magistrate would have almost certainly looked at the crash not as an accident, but as a potential murder inquiry.
Diana, 6 months before she murdered, already Lord Mitcham have put a complaint saying exactly what's going to happen to her, that she's going to be murdered in a car. And nobody done nothing to protect her, because they know they're planning to do what they have done to my son and to her.
When Condon retired and John Stevens became the police commissioner, Condon gave the Mishcon note to Stevens, and he did the same thing. He locked it in a safe. They kept it quiet. Under English law, it is a crime not to tell a coroner if you have information about the sudden, unexplained, or suspicious death of somebody. By law, you have to tell them. To conceal it is a crime. That note stayed in the safe at Scotland Yard until Paul Burrell 5 years after the princess had been killed, sold the Burrell note to the Daily Mirror. And when they published something very, very similar to the Mishcon note, only at that stage did Scotland Yard make the coroner aware that the princess had predicted the means of her death and how the tragedy would happen.
During the inquest, Michael Mansfield QC was asking the question of Lord Condon, Paul Condon, saying, if you were told, Lord Condon, that you were given a note written by a victim that 2 years before the offence or the body was found on a beach, that one day she'd be walking along that beach and she expected to be pushed over the cliff. When you were handed the note to say this is exactly what was going to happen, would you perhaps decide or think there might be something worth investigating? Lord Condon's reply was, it depends. Not, of course, not, yes, the job's a police officer. No, it depends. Depends on what? Depends on whether he wants the truth or not.
So when you think about that, you have to say, why were the top policemen actually, in English common law, committing a crime by not bringing forward relevant information? Those are the matters that make me wonder and give me due cause and for suspicion about these deaths.
There are contrasting reports from those who witnessed what happened that fateful night. Some say they saw a bright flash occur inside the tunnel just before the crash. Other witnesses claim to have seen no such light. Richard Tomlinson, a former MI6 agent, believes that what happened in the Alma Tunnel was a meticulously planned assassination using a method that had previously been generated by MI6 in order to assassinate the former president of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic.
When the accident first happened, it didn't really occur to me that it was in any way related, but what made me realise very, very strongly was that the witness report there was a very bright light in the tunnel. And as soon as I heard that, that made me click two and two things together. I think, oh, that is exactly one of the proposals that was used in the Milosevic document. And the combination of bright light and the tunnel made me think straight away, well, maybe it wasn't an accident.
Richard Tomlinson was sacked in 1995 when his personal manager claimed he was not a team player, lacked judgment, and was not committed to the service, a statement that was contested by other officers, including his boss.
He was sacked in 1995 because I think he's considered to be basically a guy with too much integrity to work for the British Security Services. He was quite clear about what he's seen while he was working for MI6. There was a plan, again proven at the inquest, to murder Slobodan Milosevic, the president of Serbia, when he was driving into a tunnel, into a Geneva tunnel, in fact, and the points mentioned in this, that Richard remembered quite well, was we're going to lead his car to be driven into a pillar inside the tunnel. And they were going to use a strobe light to disorientate the driver, to make sure he drove into the pillar in the tunnel. This was only a few years before, and it was archived. It was kept by MI6. Why would it be kept by MI6? As they had maybe some use for it later. This was actually mentioned before, after Diana's murder, to the French authorities. MI6 denied it. They lied to the French authorities and admitted in the court that they had lied to them. Now, Richard, interestingly enough, trying to give evidence after this had taken place. He went to try and get back into France. He was arrested. He was sent to prison for 1 year for breaching the Official Secrets Act. Spent 5 months of the sentence in prison, trying to stop him from getting over there. Came out of prison, went to France and tried again. Then he went to the States, was invited by NBC, a show I've been on, to New York. He was arrested by the CIA at the airport, John F. Kennedy Airport, not allowed to leave the airport, and then he was put back on a flight to come back over to Geneva, where he'd flown from initially.
On the evening of September the 2nd, 1998, Swiss Air Flight 111, the flight Richard Tomlinson was supposed to be on, crashed off the coast of Nova Scotia, killing all 229 passengers. Richard Tomlinson wasn't on board, as when he arrived at John F. Kennedy Airport, he was immediately deported and put on the next flight to Switzerland.
Fortunately, he didn't catch the flight that had been booked for him, because that plane left John F. Kennedy Airport and blew up mid-air.
Had Flight 111 been the target of a bomb and not an accident? Was the bomb placed by agents associated with British intelligence? Was the information Tomlinson held so sensitive as to justify the deaths of 229 lives? Tomlinson himself admitted that causing an airplane accident was a standard way in which intelligence services would kill people.
Again, is another classic way that intelligence services kill people. They cause airplane accidents.
Nearly 3 years after the Paris car crash that claimed the lives of Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed, the suspected cover-up of the tragedy took a deadly turn, prompting some experts to recall the pileup of corpses that followed the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Over the course of 4 years after President Kennedy was shot, at least 37 eyewitnesses died under mysterious circumstances. One aspect of the Princess Diana death that has kept many theorists wondering is the driver of the white Fiat Uno that was spotted by many eyewitnesses leaving the Alma Tunnel moments after the crash. On May 5, 2000, police in the south of France found a badly burned body inside the wreckage of a car deep in the woods near Nantes. The body was so charred that it took police nearly a month before DNA tests confirmed the dead man as James Anderson, a 54-year-old millionaire photographer who was among the paparazzi stalking Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed during the week before their deaths. A fire officer who was at the scene of Anderson's death claims to have seen what looked like 2 bullet holes in James Anderson's head. The official story was that Anderson had committed suicide as his wife had been unfaithful.
James Anderson had bought lots of fuel, spare fuel, put in the back of the car, had gone inside the car, shot himself twice in the head, and then set his body on fire with fuel so that the body was destroyed, it was cremated. A French judge said, suicide. That's a nonsense. The judge at the inquest made the point that it wasn't appropriate to talk to Christophe Pellat, who was the French fireman from Montpellier, who discovered and witnessed Anderson's body in the car, and who described the bullet holes in his head.
From the day of the crash in the Alma Tunnel, James Anderson has been at the center of the controversy. At least 7 eyewitnesses to the crash said that they saw a white Fiat Uno and a motorcycle speed out of the tunnel seconds after the crash. Forensic tests have confirmed that a white Fiat Uno collided with a Mercedes carrying Diana and Dodi, and that the collision was a significant factor in the crash. According to witnesses, motorcycles and the white Fiat Uno fled the crash scene, and French police claim they have been unable to locate the vehicle or identify the drivers or the passengers.
And you know something? The French have never found the Fiat Uno. Never. I tell you, if you and I tried to make a car disappear, we could not do it. There would always be a trace of that car somewhere, in a scrapyard or in the bottom of a lake or wherever it happened to be, the bottom of a cliff. That car disappeared and the French have never found it. Well, do tell me how that can possibly happen.
What makes Anderson's possible inclusion that night so vital is that he owned and drove a white Fiat Uno. Although the official report of the French authorities investigating the crash concluded that Anderson's car was not involved in the crash, French forensic reports made available tell a very different story.
That car was examined, And the original paint from that car exactly matched the paint on the Mercedes. The bumper sample on the Mercedes again matched that from the Fiat. But still, nothing was done by the French police.
First of all, the police said they looked for it, couldn't find it. Mohammed Al-Fayed's team found the car in February, just after the attack. They found that it had been used, it had been claimed to have been used as chicken hutch, that was on bricks. None of that was true. The car was for sale in the October, just a short while after the murder, in a garage. Mohammed Al-Fayed tried to buy it, perhaps presumably for further forensic examination. He wasn't allowed for safety reasons. Now, we don't know for whose safety reasons, but we can probably guess at that too.
Richard Tomlinson suggests that Anderson was an informant for MI6.
There was one particular informer for SIS whose normal daytime job was, of course, working as a paparazzi photographer, but occasionally he was used to do other things. And I believe that he was involved at that stage.
He was known to have been bragging about being in the tunnel that night. He was bragging with several of his friends, one of whom was a guy called Frederick Dard, a famous French crime writer, who's happened to die of a heart attack 6 weeks after James Anderson was found with 2 bullets in his head. It's known that Anderson was talking about being in the tunnel, what his activities have been, what he'd been doing. He said he had photographs that was rock the world.
Anderson's wife Elizabeth and their son James rejected the idea that Anderson's death was suicide. Sources close to the family claimed that Anderson's wife and son pressed French officials to conduct a murder investigation into Anderson's death.
His wife, Anderson's wife, Elizabeth, at first thought MI6 had murdered her husband. It's fairly clear to me what happened, that he needed to be silenced. He was going to go viral with the whole thing and make money out of it, which is the last thing the so-called British security services could accept. He was murdered also because he had been part of Diana's assassination.
Ever since the crash, it has been widely debated whether or not the man behind the wheel, Henri Paul, was intoxicated. Blood samples taken from Henri Paul showed mysteriously high levels of carbon monoxide, the Diana inquest heard. The percentage of toxins in his system was so abnormally excessive that the Frenchman should have been suffering symptoms including headaches and nausea. Yet hours before his death, Mr. Paul was captured on CCTV at the Ritz Hotel parking his car, walking around, and communicating with people. Mohammed Al-Fayed is convinced the blood samples were switched as part of the cover-up.
They had to make out he was drunk. This had to be blamed for what had happened. So, paparazzi, a drunken driver, case closed, hopefully. It was definitely not paparazzi, we know that for fact. It was SAS and SBS troops, and he wasn't drunk. They had to make out that he was, because the focus had to come on either the paparazzi, so they arrested the lot of them, so they could go on blaming them, and then also they had Henri Paul as being the drunken driver, they could always focus on him.
His blood sample showed a reading of 30% carbon monoxide. Now, that is the poison that people generally ingest from the exhaust fumes of a car. But if you had ingested 30% carbon monoxide, you wouldn't be able to function. Henri Paul was filmed immediately before the crash, running up and down stairs, interacting with people, bending down to do up his shoes, talking to people up close, Diana and Dodi and the bodyguards. He certainly didn't look like a man who was drunk or was acting in anything like a drunken way.
To me, it's fairly obvious what happened. They used the body of a recently acquired corpse, some poor devil who committed suicide, gassing himself in his car, which we know did happen. A person couldn't even stand or even stay awake with this amount of carbon monoxide in the blood. So where did that come from? Then they try to make out that, it was because when the bags in front of the car exploded as the bodies drove into the smash of the tunnel, that he would have breathed in all this carbon monoxide. There isn't any carbon monoxide in those bags at all. When the fire engines got there, they said there was no presence of carbon monoxide whatsoever. And then that was scotched as well completely. So it's pretty much a guarantee that this poor fellow who's committed suicide had his blood used, a very fresh corpse, so he could use the blood as an example, as a sample, to say this is the guy's blood, he's full of alcohol, carbon monoxide, well, put that to one side, slightly inconvenience, and this is the guy who's just driven the car and murdered Diana Spencer. Rubbish.
So those blood samples were switched. Even in the inquest, the coroner had to admit that it could not be explained, this 30% carbon monoxide. There are a lot of things, when you're doing a cover-up, you can't cover everything.
We have reports from Paris that Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident and that her partner, Dodi Fayed, has also been killed. They were apparently being pursued by paparazzi on 2 motorcycles. We have some of the latest pictures from the scene. This was the car that Diana, Dodi Fayed were traveling in. Clearly a horrendous impact. There's one of the airbags clearly visible in the front end of the car. The reports are that Diana has been killed. Dodi Fayed also died, as did the driver of the car.
Alan Power started writing The Princess Diana Conspiracy a few years after the princess's death. Since the book's release, Alan claims he's been followed by members of MI6 in an attempt to intimidate him.
George Orwell made the point that in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. And I think that's what we're looking at here. It's basically a description of what I'm trying to do. My crime is that I'm, if it's an act of terrorism, is that I'm speaking the truth. Sick and rather sad that in our so-called democracy, that I'm not permitted to speak the truth. Might make you wonder, why not? Now, I've been followed by MI6. I've had people wandering down my drive, follow me on ferries across from Isle of Man, where I live at the moment, to England. The same guy was walking down my drive about 6 weeks later. I went out to meet him. He disappeared for reasons. 2 guys at the back of his car, they turned around and they went away again. There are a few people have written about it. 1 or 2 guys have done a half-decent job about it too. But there's no evidence in there. They haven't gone and found nitty-gritty, talk to people, talk witnesses, and they haven't had the evidence before the inquest and read the inquest in detail, studied it, and then brought two together. That's not happened anywhere else. And that's what needs to happen, and MI6 know it. That's why they've been following me around the place, on board aircraft and God knows what. Why else would they bother? If my book had nothing to say, why would they waste their time? And why are they telling me my book was the cause of a problem, if it wasn't going to cause them a problem? It's just a question about people having the awareness of what's going on, the ability to actually get hold of it, the desire to get hold of it, and then actually reading it, and then coming back and making comments about it.
August 31st, 1997, the day the world mourned the loss of Princess Diana. To this day, there are many people out there who believe there was a criminal conspiracy put in place to end the life of the princess, as she was becoming a force too big for the British royal family to handle.
It was once true that for years the monarchy used to murder people left, right and centre. Whenever they felt it was appropriate, they bumped them off. I think it's about time we realised it's not just about Diana, it's about British democracy. We have no democracy in Britain. We never have. It's never been there. It's an illusion to think we have it. We have a sort of a touch, sort of slight ethereal hold on democracy, but it's never really there because there's always the power retained to control you and prevent you from saying what they don't want you to say. Now, take my case in point. I've been controlled as best they can for quite a long time.
It's very convenient for a lot of people that Diana, Princess of Wales, is no longer here. So very reluctantly, I have had to conclude that Dodi and Diana, who I knew for 11 and 12 years, who I liked very much, and who I knew would have been a great couple together, I have to conclude that they were killed.
As we pass the 18th anniversary of her death, there are bunches of flowers on the gilded gates leading to her London home, Kensington Palace. The flowers to commemorate the princess may be fewer now, but there are still as many questions into her death as ever. Many people feel the truth about Diana's death has been suppressed, but hopefully not suppressed for good.
And the problem with the conspiracy theories is the fact we don't have all the facts. It's like a jigsaw puzzle with a dozen pieces missing. We can see most of it, we can't see all of it. For whatever reason, some pieces are missing, and maybe they'll always be missing.
And of course, we still await the proof. There's plenty of circumstantial evidence, there's plenty of forensic evidence, but the substantive proof has yet to come. I happen to believe that it will come. One often has to wait a number of years for this to happen. With the assassination of John F. Kennedy on the 22nd of November 1963, only recently has very persuasive evidence been elicited that it was, in fact, the gun of one of the Secret Servicemen driving in the car behind that fired the fatal third shot. So evidence can still arise. And I know that Mohammed Al-Fayed and I and anybody who's interested in the truth is still awaiting that day. I think it will come. I just hope it doesn't take too long.
When the sun goes down.